Not all revenue has the same value. So, for example, a customer paying you $100 per month is clearly worth more to you than one that's paying you $100 as a one-off. But not all of us can run subscriptions like that, can we? Or can't we? Well, in this episode, I'm going to be interviewing Louise White, who's a master at redefining revenue strategies and a champion of business transformation, and is a strong believer that any business can have a subscription model. Now, Louise has got an incredible background with deep experience in commercial marketing and mergers and acquisitions. She's successfully guided businesses to skyrocket their valuations by rethinking how they perceive and handle their revenue streams, achieving returns as high as 28x upon exit. Now, Louise is currently acting as a non-executive director and chief marketing officer to multiple media firms, including Sift Media, which owns Accounting Web, HR Zone, Training Zone, Accounting Excellence, and many more industry-leading brands. And so if you want to get a slice of the benefit of a superstar commercial marketing person for your business without having to pay the big bucks, then you're going to love this episode. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by Louise White. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm delighted to be here. That was a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's start. Your early career was actually in printed media businesses, and you were in the heart of those businesses when the internet began to disrupt them. How did that change your approach and way of thinking to growing business revenue?
It was fairly fundamental. Publishing was probably the industry that was impacted by the invention of the internet than any other industry. And I was really lucky because when that happened, I worked for a big publishing company called Incisive, where I was in charge of about 45 different brands. And some of them, all of them were print, some of them were also print and digital. And as the internet essentially decimated any of the publications that relied on advertising revenue, I had a really helicopter view of disaster unfolding in front of me. And that was not always fun, but it was a great learning experience, because what I learned there was that brands and markets were irrelevant, that the same trajectory happens to every single one of those publications, irrespective of the brand equity, the market, everything. Exactly the same trajectory happened to all of them. They went from, computing is a great example. That was the first one to go because it was a tech market. That had done £17 million of advertising revenue a year in print, and that translated in digital worlds to less than 3 million. And that happened in about 2 years.
Wow.
And then I watched that happen to the next tranche of titles and the next tranche of titles and the next. And sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but it was inevitable. And that gave me probably one of the first great learning experiences of realizing that if a trend is happening and something is happening, it's going to happen to you. And I had publishers of magazines who were right at the end of that process, who clung on to the hope, the belief that they were somehow different and it wasn't going to happen to them. And I had the confidence to say, it is going to happen to you. And you have a decision to make. Well, I actually had a decision to make, which is say you can wait to be on the burning platform, or you can see what is inevitably going to happen to you and make decisions now about how you move from your cash cow, your gravy train of one type of revenue into a different type of revenue. And if you don't do that, the thing that happened to computing is going to happen to you, from 17 million to 3 million in 2 years. So it was something that publishing most people who worked publishing hated living through that experience, because it wasn't fun.
No.
But it was also genuinely interesting to be part of, because it forced people like me who could see what was happening into positions where we started to have responsibility for taking decisions away from people who couldn't see that, and being able to step into much more group strategic roles and say, I can see how this plays out. And now we've tried these with the first 8 titles that went, we tried 8 different solutions and only one of them worked. And funnily enough, because that worked, it's probably going to work with the next 32 titles that it's going to happen to. And I started to get a track record and confidence, and I hope a little bit of expertise in how you take burning platforms before they become a crisis and how you see them approaching. And I guess how that translates to what I do today is I see burning platforms way before other people see them. And part of strategy and part of looking at businesses from a helicopter point of view is seeing when that is about to happen to you, but seeing that 2-3 years in advance and making those decisions now, not waiting until you have no choice.
Yeah. And that's an incredible skill that, as you say, that you've been fortunate to kind of build and learn as a result of being in the wrong industry at the wrong time. So I'm glad you see the positive and taking that from it. And I think I can see how for many business owners, but also any leaders, it can be difficult when you're on the inside to believe that this big sweeping trend is going to hit you, or even to see it at all. And it reminds me of the Clayton M. Christensen books, Innovator's Dilemma and Innovator Solution, where he essentially talks about how in every industry there is disruption happening. It's just where in the industry it's happening at what stage. And that this disruption is constantly happening. And therefore, as you say, strategy is all about seeing it coming and coming up with a solution and picking the right horse and so on. And I think it's interesting that you say with the first 8 titles, you did 8 different things and one of those worked. And of course, for most business leaders, they're going, I don't think I'm going to get 8 shots at it. like if you're a business that's currently staring down the barrel of AI right now, there's a huge fear of, but what if we pick the wrong way to go with this? And of course you can learn from what others, our first movers are doing, and you can do little tests and so on. What would be your advice to business leaders when they're looking at that, where if they start to realize, I know we need to change, I just don't know how? What should their thinking, how should they be approaching that problem in their thinking?
Yeah, one of the best bits of advice I can give people is you're not alone. And I see it. I still work in publishing and media, and I work with a variety of publishing companies, and they still tackle problems as if they were the only people to ever come across this. And what's part of my job is to educate people and say, look sideways. So what a lot of people, especially in crisis or the brink of a burning platform, tend to do, and Swift is a business where this is what was happening, and it's certainly a lot of the publishing companies, is they look down and they start spending a lot of time in their business trying to prop things up, panicking, keeping plates spinning, thinking, God, I've got to try that. Should I try that? That's too risky. And not enough time. And it's really hard to do in a crisis, but it's the only thing that's the right thing to do in a crisis, is to stop trying to fix every single little problem that's coming up. Like if you're a genuine leader and you are a true business person, that's the point where you start to look sideways and you start to try and see not just my competition, but businesses that have the same underlying model as me. And you don't have to be limited to looking at a firm that's a looky-likey to me. You start to look at a metric, a market, a thing that looks like the challenge, the disruption that I'm facing, and copy the only people that got through that alive. But you do not have to face it on your own. And I work a lot with founders of companies, and to a man and to a woman, that's normally the problem that they all have, is they are unable to see the wood from the trees. And it takes me to come in and say, you pay me to have the solutions to this, but how do you think I find the solutions to this?
Yeah.
What do I do that you're not doing? And what I do is I'm not in your business talking to a client over there, doing that over there, trying to fix that, trying to save that, trying to do the job of 4 people. I look at what good looks like, and I look at people who've tried things that didn't work, and I find the 3 people that made it work, and I copy them. And then you start to be able to have a playbook for what good looks like in a really specific thing that you do, which may not be just copying your competitor, but might be someone who's got the same pressure that I've got, the same risks, same challenges coming into my business, you'll find them elsewhere. And I don't think a lot of people do that. And I'm very lucky because I worked in publishing at the beginning of my career, and it is one of the best industries for that kind of sharing. It's a genuine community, like neat, and because we all went through this burning platform, we all went through gravy train to absolute disaster. It created a Dunkirk spirit amongst niche publishers and even the big B2C players. I'd spend as much time with the strategy director and the CMO of the FT because they had exactly the same problem. FT was not immune to this. They went through the same process. They had more money to throw at the problem. And I spent a lot of time going, I don't have to do this on my own because it's lonely and it's hard and it's terrifying. I can actually copy what the FT did. Which is exactly, I mean, that was the one thing that worked on those 8 titles was what the FT had done. Oh, wow. And I copied the FT because they had the same problem I had, a print publication with the digital element where print dollars turned into digital dimes. And they had a team of 40 analysts who could be what is now AI, but do the job of an AI algorithm to work out how to do paywalls, how to do lockdown content, how to do user journeys. And I just I watched what they had done. I worked out what had worked. I hired their head of marketing and I just copied them because it was a shortcut to excellence. I could see that they knew, one, they had a better idea than me of what good looked. They had the resources to make good work. And I didn't have to copy. I didn't have to spend money on 40 analysts. I just needed to hire the head of marketing and get them to give me the light version of this.
Smart.
And that's what I would advise people to do is don't think you're unique because you're not. And somebody else has come up with a solution, so just pinch it.
Yeah, and that concept of don't think you're unique is often a hard one for people. Like I spend a lot of my time or a lot of my interactions in my career have been with business owners where the feeling might be expressed something along the lines of our business is a bit different. Our business is unique because, and they don't just mean it in the sense of we're special because we do things better or we've got a unique selling point. They believe that their business is very unusual from all businesses generally, and particularly in their industry and so on. And sometimes I think that's just an element of, because they're so close to it, they see it in all of its complexity, and they don't see that complexity in other businesses. And so they assume that therefore theirs must be different. Whereas, of course, we've both had the benefit of getting to work with many, many different businesses, and you get to see behind the detail and you see it's messy in all these different businesses. But actually, there's some standard things that are consistent across those businesses. And it's those things that actually play a much bigger factor than the messiness behind it. And so if you were advising a business owner who's perhaps struggling with that, I can't even think of who I would look at aside from my adjacent competitors, but I'm sure as hell not going to go and talk to them and, they're rubbish anyway and whatever. Is there a way in which we can kind of look at the business and simplify it? And the thing that comes to mind for me is, I suspect to some extent your answer, but I don't put words in your mouth too much, is it's around that revenue model. It's around how do you value the revenue? What's the model look like and so on? But talk me through the approach that you'd have. What would you be looking for if we're looking at a business and we're trying to look for a similar one that isn't a competitor?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's hard for people to do, but it's a really useful job. Is to start from the starting position, I'm not unique. And then you take another step back and say, what is my business model? What do I actually do? Because if I look at publishing as an example, or even event organizers or any kind of thing, like when you take, they'll say, well, I serve my community, I do this. And I'm like, that's just the noise that you tell yourself. That's the lies we tell ourselves. Let's take it back another step and another step. And then you say, actually, I put buyers and sellers together. Okay, that's interesting and yes, I'm sure there's more, like the business is beautiful and complex and things, but that is ultimately what you do. And I think the more steps I can get people to take back, the easier they suddenly go, okay, so I'm actually putting buyers and sellers together. And there's only, in every market, only 2 or 3 ways you can do that actually works. And so then you can start to say, that's really interesting, because I'm not now in the weeds talking about the 55 things that my company does. We actually bring it back. If you can't bring your company back to just 1 or 2 things that it actually does, like you need to get back there. And then you can say, okay, are there other businesses that do a similar kind of thing? And can I start to see that there are some similarities here, that I could actually say, where am I unique? And the uniqueness of businesses, it's the great lie we all tell ourselves. And you and I know this because we've worked across industries, worked across businesses, is that there are only maybe 4 or 5 business models that work. And there's some that work better than others. And if you start to stand and look at it like that, you can suddenly say, okay, I'm actually a bit like a legal firm, or I'm very much like a publisher, or I'm a bit like an events business, or I'm like maybe I'm more like an FMCG. And then you can start to see, oh, okay, how do they cope with this? How are the people that are, have faced disruption and come out the other side, how have they done it? And I find it's a really interesting process. I've just been through it with Sift. So if I had gone into Sift, I did go into Sift 6-7 months ago, and I'd asked everybody at Sift what they did all day, I'd have got 40 different answers, and none of them would have been right. All of them would have been complicated. And when it boils down to what Sift does, it's what all publishers do in one way or another. It's put buyers and sellers together. It's all businesses do, really, is put people who want to buy it and sell stuff together. And then I can kind of say, in that environment and in that market in publishing, there's only 4 ways to do that. You can do user revenue, you can do events, or you can do advertise. 3, actually. There's only 3, really. There's user revenue, events, and advertising. That's it.
Yeah.
And each of those parts of the business behave exactly the same, whether you're in the legal market, the farming market, the pharmaceuticals market. The metrics, the underlying metrics of the business are the same. Even between good ones and bad versions, the underlying economics of the business are the same. And I think for people who are struggling, if you stop thinking about what market am I in, stop thinking about that, start thinking about what's my business model. If you know the answers to that, then you can start to copy from other people who have the same business model, who do it really, really well. And it takes that conceit, really, that we're somehow unique out of it, and makes simplicity from complexity, and decision making at any level is easier the simpler you make it. And I've spent a life at really getting boards, getting senior people in a business to just let go and really think about it. I'll give you a great example. Actually, it's one of my favourite ones. We bought a magazine called Farmer's Guardian. Now, I know nothing about farming. And that was their argument. They were like, you understand, how could you possibly advise us on how to run a farming newspaper because you don't know anything about farming? They're right. And that was a great benefit that I didn't understand farming, because I didn't look at it and think about what do farmers need. I looked at the business model, and I could show them that they believed that because they believe farmers didn't use the internet. And that was based on I don't know what it was based on. It was based on a very small subsection. A very small subsection of farmers that they spoke to. And they would not believe that their business was going to behave in the same way that computing behaved. They just said, you don't understand us. We're too, how could you possibly say the same thing's going to happen? And when I get faced with that, and it's a good thing for people to do if it's just them having to make these kind of decisions, is just go back to some facts. So we had 3 titles. We had a media title, a pharmaceutical title, and a farming title that we bought. And I normalized the web stats and the devices that people have been looking at the websites on. and I sent them around to everybody and said, tell me which one's the media one, tell me which one is the one aimed at GP, and tell me which one is the one aimed at farming. And I knew the answer because I wouldn't have sent it around. And the one where 60% of the audience was viewing the content on an iPhone was farming.
Oh, wow.
And they thought it was, they all wanted to go, well, it's bloody media, it's the media wants, isn't it? And no, the media wants actually viewed most of the content on desktop, because this is pre-COVID and they were all based in the office. The GPs viewed a lot of it on iPads, actually, was the predominant device on which they were using it because they had them in their surgeries, and the farmers were using iPhones. Mobile first, internet, consumers of their content, and it helped me stop the arguments and start to move the dial and say, we need to build a business around mobile first digital content, not a newspaper, because that is not how they read it. And I could show them the trends, and because it was the internet and because it was mobile and it was taking off at a rate of change, you could say that even in that month and the next month, it had gone from 60 to 62 to 64 to, and I could just say, now do you understand me when I talk about trajectories and having to make decisions now, because this is just happening whether you like it or not. And I think that's those kind of moments, I think, move the dial in terms of decision making. And if you can kind of, as a business owner, if you can try to, one, understand your business model, and two, try to find some kind of statistics which show how that business model is being impacted by something elsewhere, and then go, that is going to happen to me. It gives you a power that your competitors won't have, because they'll be fixing the problems, trying to work out should I do a little test here? Should I do a little test there? Should I put my fingers in that pie and see what happens? Should I wait and see what Bob does next to me? It gives you, that's competitive edge, and that's uniqueness that you really should strive for. Not my business is unique, because it isn't.
No,
but the way you run your business, if you run it like a helicopter view strategically, that is unique, because a lot of people don't do that. And that's why people like you and I exist, is because businesses that find that difficult parachute us in to point out what to me is blatantly obvious. And I understand that the reason is because I spent my life seeing the same thing play out over.
And it does make it easier, right, when you've seen it that many times and that many different businesses. One things that I know from our conversations is that you've talked about, as you say, when you look at the simplicity of some of these models, you start seeing the patterns and seeing the values of these different models. And I know that one of the models that you're passionate about is the power of a subscription model. And we've talked at length previously about, yes, there are industries like, I have a couple of businesses in the software space where, software as a service and the subscription model is kind of considered bread and butter as part of it. But I know that you believe that actually any business should be able to operate with a subscription model, full stop, or even as a component. What fuels that belief? Help us explore that a bit.
Yeah, so the way I've always, I'm a subscription marketer by trade, but the other hat that I've always worn is M&A and valuations of businesses and doing due diligence on businesses. And as we know, the highest valuation on any business is a subscription business. So everybody goes, oh my God, we have to do subscriptions, which is missing the point, because you then have to go strip that away and say, why is subscriptions more valuable? Why would a market place a very high 28 times multiple value on a subscription business? And you strip a layer back and you say it's because it's repeatable revenue. And you say, okay, that's somehow less scary than selling subscriptions. So how do you ensure repeatable revenue in any business? And I'll use SIFT as an example, because SIFT is a publishing business. The instinct is to say, well, we should have subscriptions. We should have user revenue. We should have subscriptions because we're publishing. Is the wrong question to be asking. You will have to look at and say, have people in that market got the ability and propensity to buy subscriptions? And the answer is no. So does that mean subscriptions are off the table? No, it doesn't. So you start to look at, well, where do we have propensity and ability to pay for things? And it's in events and it's in advertising. My job is to say you can get a similar multiple for revenue that at the moment in your business is transactional. So if you sell, so the biggest flip for someone like SIFT, and not just SIFT, but for other companies that I've worked with, is say the reason that revenue is transactional is because you sell it transactionally, because you don't think about your customers as subscribers. You sell them a product that is a time limited or one-off thing, and then you go back to them 3 months and try and sell them something different, and you go back to them 3 months later and try and sell them something different. And that's why you have a transactional model, which is never going to be a high multiple on exit or on valuation. It might be 4 times, 5 times EBIT, as opposed to 28 times, which is a subscription. Now, you can't get to 28 times multiple unless you've got pricing, subscription, complex stuff. But what you can do is just reimagine a business and say, how would we move from having a transactional relationship to a long-term, annualized, auto-renewing, baked-in price rises, average order value going up, customer lifetime value, using subscription metrics to look at a revenue stream which is on its surface, it's got nothing to do with subscriptions. And then it opens everybody's eyes, because you say, and it's not as simple as this, because I wouldn't have a job if it was as simple as this. But part of the process is to say, we are creating artificial ceilings. We are creating we've just made this assumption that if you're selling advertising or selling an event, it's a very transactional thing. It happens in March. Here you go, buy a stand, have a lovely time, and we'll see you next year if you had a good event. And that is transactional. That's not renewable. And when a business starts to go, well, how would I make that revenue renewable? You flip everything and you say, if you think about how SaaS businesses operate and how subscription businesses operate, they don't do transactional stuff. They have a whole mechanism and a whole lexicon and a whole way of thinking about customers, which is about longevity and delighting those people, and not just upselling them something, but adding value into that person's life, which they can't do without. And people say, well, how do you do that with a piece of advertising? And you say, well, because if you sell somebody a lead, it's transactional. If you sell somebody solving their biggest marketing problems all year, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that feels more like a subscription. That feels more like something that can be annualized. And the reason we love subscription revenue is because it's deferred income, because you have visibility on your balance sheet about what's coming in. And that's why it's valuable, and that's why it attracts a high multiple. And a lot of people discount subscriptions because they say, well, I don't have content to sell, or it's not good enough, or my market won't pay for the content. And my argument is, well, that's good, that's fine. Don't do that then. Look at the rest of your business and start to say, what could we do that would make it behave like a subscription product? And some of it is just, some of the simplest things you can do is talk like subscription people. So instead of saying, I've got a revenue target to hit, which is what every salesperson's got a revenue target. If you give salespeople revenue targets and ask them to hit them, that's what they do. If you have a different breed of salespeople and a different metrics by what good looks like, and you say it's on average order value and it's on customer lifetime value, suddenly you are forcing people out of that transactional mindset. And you probably need a different type of salesperson, or you need to train them better. And if it was simple, I wouldn't have a job. But it can start from there and say, what if we judged our sales team on average order value and on retention of customers and on customer lifetime value? Because those are subscription metrics, SaaS metrics that we all have lived and breathed. Suddenly your transactional relationships start to look a bit different, and you start to question, why on earth do we have transactional relationships with people? And then you start to think about that from a customer point of view and think, isn't that customer going to feel and be treated very differently if we care about keeping that customer, retaining the money they give us, renewing that as a percentage? And revenue retention rates on subscriptions or corporate subscriptions is 110, 120%. What if we thought about customers like that? And then you have to go, okay, how would we behave differently as a business if suddenly our customers were genuinely important? They weren't just a means to an end. They weren't just hit my revenue target in January, in March, in July, and just keep going and keep going. So what if I hadn't annualized relationship with that customer. And that is quite powerful and often stops people in their tracks to go, oh, because I use events as an example, because I've worked with a lot of events businesses, and pure play events businesses go, well, we have an event in July and that's our target. Our target is to get £1 million in July, and that's our target. And everybody works really, very hard to get the £1 million and to get all the delegates that they said they were going to get there.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then everyone takes July, August, September off and just cries because it was so stressful. And what they will try to do is rebook people on the day, and that's their renewal thing. I'll rebook people on the day, and if I get an 80% renewal, I'm happy. And then we can take 3 months off and just forget about it, and then start all again. I mean, you wouldn't do that with a subscription product, would you? You wouldn't sell somebody a subscription product and then not deliver it for 3 months. It would ruin your business really quite quickly if you bought a subscription to something and then everybody took 3 months off because they'd sold it to you and they'd hit their target and they'd all, I don't need to deal with you anymore. Like, if you work in a subscription business, you never have that mindset. You're never off, you're always on. And your relationships with customers are always on. And in any business, if you start to, I mean, I've got a great example. It's a really niche example. Right, I'm horsey, and my daughter goes to riding schools. I've been to riding schools, and I had a horse that I kept at a riding school, and I spent a lot of time with she's a small, genuinely small business, tiny business, employed about 4 people, and they were busy, but they were not profitable. And they were lucky because if you're in that business, you've got this like endless supply of small children, girls mostly, that want to learn how to ride. So you just have a pipeline of new business coming in all of the time. And she'd never thought about it like this. I was like, you've got an endless supply of new business because the young girls just want to ride. What you fail to do is keep those customers beyond the age of 13, because most of them discover boys and bugger off. She'd never thought about it in terms of that's a really limited, like she was always chasing her tail. It's a really unprofitable business if that's all you think about. And so for her, I was saying, if you think about it, about of those 13-year-olds that carry on being horsey, and there's not many of them, but they may stay with you in all sorts of guises, including people like me who end up loaning a horse from you. How do you create a subscription type business for those people? And rather than just selling them, like she had a model of you bought 5 lessons, you got 1 free. It was like, what if you had for each of those people a development plan over the course of a year about what they were going to achieve? What were their goals? What were they trying to achieve? Did they want to buy a horse at the end of it? Because then suddenly you start to be able to sell them stable management lessons. You'd be able to sell them if they want to go and do some dressage. You can take them through a dressage pathway. But what you've got is a year's worth of lessons booked. They don't necessarily give you the money up front because that's a lot of money, but they start to commit to you over the long, long time. And often what happens with people who go through riding schools, when you buy your first horse, you get your instructor to help you buy it, and then you give them a commission. Right. And I was just able to sit with her and say, your business could run like a subscription business. You've got this weird, like you're running a very transactional, high lead, loads and loads of leads, but it's really unprofitable. And it changed her business. And what it did mostly was took her stress levels down. About 50%, because she had visibility. Horses are bloody expensive. I mean, we've got 20 horses. It's really expensive, and they'll get ill and they get injured, and it's just expensive. And she would live hand to mouth and be checking the weather. Oh my God, there's not going to be. I could feed them hay. That's really expensive. And she could suddenly start to go, I know that at least 30% of my revenue is guaranteed, unless the person dies, falls off a horse, breaks their neck, or whatever. And she went on holiday for the first time in about 8 years once she started to look at her business like that.
Yeah.
And she was able to hire a yard manager as opposed to having 15 fly-by-night grooms, teenage girls who came in and out. And that's such a niche, weird business. You'd never think, can you run a riding school like a subscription business? But you can. If you start to think about what revenue could I repeat, and where could I get my best customers to stay with me for a long period of time. And that I learned that in publishing. You can apply that everywhere. It's just a way of thinking. When you're lazy like me, I love subscriptions because I can go into a meeting in January and tell you pretty much where I'm going to end up in December, because 70% of my revenue is booked. And I'm like, why wouldn't you do that? If you can find a way to apply that, why wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And I love that, because that kind of gets the heart of it for me, and for relation for this podcast, right? It's de-stress your business. It's about like the impact is what we're really looking for. It's not necessarily the 20x valuation.
Yeah.
Like if you're planning on exiting your business, then sure. But frankly, if you're thinking, right, I want to exit my business, you're probably thinking, I want to exit my business within the next 2 years. And that's probably too short a timeline to go, I'm going to fundamentally change the underlying business model. Whereas what we're really talking about is not just increasing it as a valuation for someone else to acquire it, but increasing its value to you and increasing its value to your team, because you're able to reduce the stress. And I think you've given some great examples of how it reduces the stress there, including being able, not having to live hand to mouth and worry about where's your money going to come from, because you actually do know that there's money coming in, but also the fact that you're able to predict a bit more the resourcing that you're going to need. And so, I was talking to the owner of an accountancy and bookkeeping practice yesterday. And for her, she was at this stage, like early stage in the business, where the income is still a little bit unknown. And as a result, she's kind of hiring a sister and, using some subcontractors and still accepting some subcontracted work. And in that difficult stage that a lot of businesses go through, where you're just trying to get started. And I think, as you say, what you're trying to get to is a point where you're able to be confident of what revenue is coming in, so that you can decide, rather than use a bit of my sister and a subcontractor or whatever, I'm actually going to hire someone to do this job, and so on. I like the point that you made earlier, which is actually when you understand the fundamental business model that you're actually in, even that becomes easier as well. Because I think if we take that same business, the accountancy practice, it's like, what business are they actually in? Well, as a practice owner, you're in the business of bringing skilled people who have got a set of skills and aptitudes, and often having completed some form of training or courses, either inside your own practice or externally, and bringing them under a sort of process and whatever to clients. And that's what it is. And whereas most accountants will think of it as, no, the business that I'm in is I'm doing people's accounts and their books and all those things. It's like, no, that's what you're doing if you're the accountant. As the employee, that's what you're doing. As the business owner, your job is actually to bring this set of skills, these people, to these clients and make that seem seamless, and that they're not having, it's not like I was working with Dave yesterday and now it's Susan, and Dave and Susan don't seem to ever talk, and so on. Like, that's actually the business model you're in. As you made the point earlier, like when you start looking at it like that, you can start to see the similarities of other industries that have these kind of models. And I think that's so powerful when we talk about reducing that stress relating to hiring and organizing your business and so on. What are the ways in which, for examples where you've been working with those businesses, how have you seen day-to-day operation, the way in which teams work, the way in which they think short-term and long-term? How have you seen that change when the business model changes? And perhaps if you want to go back to perhaps an events example, because I think that's most people have been to events and they get that there are sponsors that are paying to be at the events. And, essentially, as you say, you're bringing buyers and sellers together, and the buyers probably don't want to pay to attend the event, and certainly don't want to pay for an ongoing subscription. And if they are going to pay for both those things, they want to pay small amounts, whereas the companies are willing to pay much more. Like, how did you go about that? What did it look like? And what was the impact as a result in the business?
Yeah, so I think I'll use Swift as an example because it's what I'm currently doing. It's my day job now. What businesses tend to do, and what Swift has been doing, and not just Swift, just a lot of small companies, is they focus around a brand, they focus around a product, they focus around an event, and then they structure a bunch of people around that as well. And when I come in and say, like, keep moving, I always move the goalpost. If you thought that your objective was to run an event with an X number of delegates, what if I tell you that's not the objective? What if I tell you that is easy? The thing that you all must do that. I think that's bread and butter. Any people can do that. That's straightforward. What about if I move the goalpost and said, what are you actually trying to achieve here? What's the relationship? What's the end goal? Why are we doing this? Why are we running an event? And take out we need to make some money. Why are we actually doing it? And that goes in for some really interesting directions, because you stop looking at that as being your end goal, and you start to look at, it's about to make someone's life easier. It's to help a vendor do a really big deal. And not just a lead, but to meet somebody who might be the person that does the deal for them, that then goes on to be a client for 8 years. It's that when I look at changing business models from transactional to renewal, and then suddenly underneath that you start to go, the way we behave, not just the sales team, the editorial team, the marketing team, all of those people are all part of a different very linear transactional process. And when you flip it and say, we are here to make that vendor make money, like what do you want the experience of Intuit to be at an event? Do you want them to have a busy stand? Yes, you do. Any fool can do that. Do you want someone at Intuit to have done 3 deals that set that business up for success and set that person and their department up for success for the next 7 years, because their customer lifetime value might be 7 years? When you start, that's what I want. That's what I really want to happen at that event. And do I want the people that came along to the event to have had a couple of light bulb moments where they can literally go back to business and go, I'm going to do this differently? Suddenly you don't really have editorial teams and marketing teams and sales teams and customer experience teams or logistics teams. You have one team that focus around the customer journey and what do we actually want to happen to the people. These, like, everyone gets very focused on hitting numbers, don't they? Let's get a delegate number. I'm like, do you mean a people number? Do you mean people that are giving up a day of their lives to do something? Because they're not names on a spreadsheet. These are actual human beings. And if we give ourselves a target, like a number to hit, it's kind of, I mean, I keep saying it and everyone hates me, but I'm like, any fool can do that. Put enough resource at it, put enough brain power, anyone can do that. That's not an end goal. What's the end goal after that? And eventually you get to a point where there are no more end goals, and eventually you have a big group of people underneath who are in charge of delivering that experience, who stop thinking about end goals and experiences and start thinking about, this is what we do. And it almost feels almost like intangible. I was like, that's just restructuring. I'm like, no, because if I just came in and restructured, everybody would end up being really enthused or forced for 3 months, and they would go back to exactly what they've been doing before. You could have given them a different job title, put them in a different department, whatever, they will still go back and do. So to change how people operate and how to change a business model is just keep moving the goals. Just keep asking why. If you get to a point where you stop saying why, if you can say, well, why? Why do we do that? Why is that the number we're going after? Once you run out, once you really can't say why anymore, you probably got to the truth. And it is a bit like, why are Intuit here? Because they have to be. Why? Because they need leads. Do they? Why do they need leads? Is it leads they need? Go and ask them. Turns out the problem isn't leads. The problem of any SaaS business is never leads. I don't know why everybody tries to sell in the leads. Trust me, it's pointless. It's not the problem. I know, because I'm a CMO who ran a SaaS business, and I know my problem was never leads. It's not even qualified leads. It's something different. My problem is I need to have a average revenue retention rate of 110% is my problem. That's what I'm judged. And I don't actually need any more leads. The problem most people have is they've got too many leads and not enough salespeople. But every single event company just sells leads because that's easy, isn't it? It's very transactional. It's ROI. Here's a lead. Here's an ROI. Here's a thing. Bang. And it's when you start running an events business or any business, going back to stop every metric you think is important is probably wrong. If when you say the word why, you go bollocks, that's, like, actually, why do we do that? Why is that a number? And the more you get to the truth, then reorganizing businesses, restructuring teams, changing business models, again, it becomes simple, because most things that people believe are not true. It's the lies we tell ourselves. And I think that's, as a leader of a business, that's the job. The job is check everything. Don't believe your own bullshit. Don't, what you say to market, sit down honestly and go, does that really help? Is that really it? And I think the more leaders have the humility, I suppose, and the curiosity to keep sense checking everything they believe, the stronger businesses you get, because you just see things really differently.
Agree. Yeah, I love that. And I think as you say, asking that question why, to really challenge do you understand the underlying reason behind it? I think, and like the example of for SaaS businesses, do they want the leads? It's like, well, if you ask them, they'll initially say yes. But actually, you're right that what really matters is giving that retention rate. Because if I can show in a calculation that with the growth of customers we get and the stickiness of the customers means that even if I don't make any further sales the following year, my revenue will continue to grow, I can pay loads. I'll keep on putting more money into this. Whereas if you go, I'll give you 1,000 leads, and I say, what conversion rate, what retention rate, what whatever, and as most marketing companies would tell me, I go, well, that depends and we don't know, and that's really up to you. Then it's like, okay, well, then I can give it a punt. I can give it a try, which is why you end up with the transactional sales that are small value rather than something that's more ongoing and so on. I love that point of just digging into the why behind the why behind the why to really understand that. Now, unfortunately, we're coming up for time. So Louise, you've been amazing. I'm going to make sure that we link to you on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. But how would you recommend that other people learn more from you or about this topic? What are the top resources that you recommend people check out?
The best advice I was given, actually, right at the beginning of my career, was by somebody who is still my mentor, really. Their greatest piece of advice was, don't ever get to the point where you have to talk to a recruitment consultant ever again. And I was like, I love that. How do I do that? And his advice would be, it's your responsibility. Like, you need to get out there, you need to network, you need to go and find people like you and hunt them down. And he used to make me speak at conferences, and I used to hate him for making me do it, but he made me sign up to LinkedIn, Twitter. This is like way before they were anything like they are now. And it is go to events, speak at conferences, listen to webinars, reach out to people, start to build a network of clever people who know more than you and learn from them. And it was the best advice I was ever given, was it's on you. There is no magic bullet. The magic bullet is actually putting aside some time and effort and getting stuck in. And it really works. You don't need to make many good connections before they start to snowball. And that would be my advice to everyone.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Love that advice. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Louise, for joining me. You've been absolutely fantastic. And thanks to everyone else for listening. Really appreciate you joining us for this episode. And if you found this episode useful, please do go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review with a comment. Even if it's just a few words, it makes a big difference. You can choose your own words, but if you want help with that, life-changing, practical tips, insightful, brilliant, gold, Louise was awesome, whatever works for you, put something in. I read them all and I really, really appreciate it. So please do provide a review. It makes a big difference to the podcast. But otherwise, until next time, have fun.